Hello and welcome to What KT Made Next. I'm KT and today I'm hoping to make a short video about polishing rubbers for engraving on glass. Now I have done a previous video about how these rubbers are used to produce shades and tones on the glass, and I'll put a link to that in the description and hopefully on the screen here somewhere if I can manage that. But today's video is a little bit more theoretical. I've seen a lot of questions coming up from people wondering about the different colours and grades of polishing rubber that are available, and I hope to go over some of that today. The first thing we can talk about are the shapes of the polishing rubbers, and they come in a range of different shapes. We have bullet shaped rubbers, large ones, some smaller ones, great big brutes of bullet shaped rubbers like this. For these rubbers, they tend to come, they're moulded onto the shaft, so it arrives with you looking like that. And these are widely available. You can get them from online retailers, Amazon, as well as from more specialist suppliers. The next style of polishing rubber is, I think, properly referred to as a cylinder. I tend to call them bullet rubbers still, because once you've used them for a while they tend to end up bullet shaped, but they're called properly cylinders. And they come with a little hole in one end, and you have to have the right mandrel for these. So you attach the mandrel by screwing it into the end of the cylinder rubber, and then it's ready to use. The next style, these are called discs for obvious reasons, flat discs, like these. Now, these ones are called wheels rubbers because they have a flat edge to them. You can also get knife-edged ones which come shaped. I don't tend to bother too much getting the knife-edge shaped ones because I find once I've used them for a while, the profile of the edge changes anyway, so the wheel ones are the ones I get. But again, these come as a disc, and you have to have the correct mandrel which you fit through the centre and screw in from the other side, and then it's ready to use from there. And the last shape I'm going to talk about, I tend to call these pencil rubbers, but I think they're properly called pin rubbers. And these ones are the tiniest little ones, and they have a very specialist mandrel that you have to fit them into, where you unscrew the end and then fit the rubber into the middle, and you can adjust the length of it, how much of it is coming from the end of the mandrel, and then screw it back down, and that gives you your polishing rubber. So those are the shapes. Why the different shapes? Just for convenience. Obviously the little pin rubbers are good for doing smaller areas. The discs work well when you're covering larger areas. The bullet-shaped rubbers, they're widely available and they're quite adaptable. They probably, depending on the size of them, you can do the jobs of both the disc and the pencil or pin rubbers with these ones. So the shape of them is purely about convenience. The thing that does vary about them is the colour. Manufacturers use the colour to code how coarse or fine the abrasive is within each polishing rubber. These polishing rubbers consist of an abrasive which is suspended inside usually a silicone rubber shape, whether it's a bullet or a disc. And the manufacturers, when they make these, can vary the type of rubber that they put it in, but they most often vary how abrasive the material suspended in them is. So the colours mean something, and they talk about They're meant to indicate to you how abrasive that particular polishing rubber is. The reason I'm making this video today is the question, I've seen the question coming up lots of times saying, what do the colours mean? And sadly I have to tell you that there is no universally accepted standard for the colour that's associated with different grades of abrasiveness. This set that I picked up from Amazon, for example, is quite a good set. It has cylinders, discs in it, and it came with the mandrels in it. In this set, the black is the coarsest, is a coarse. The white is described as mid-coarse. The green is a fine abrasive, and the brown is an ultra-fine, a very fine abrasive. And that's great for this one. However, if I go and look at different suppliers, if I look at the Eternal website, for example, for them, white means coarse. That's if we're looking at their mini silicone abrasive polishers. White means coarse. Black is medium. Blue is fine. And pink is ultra-fine. If I look at Cooks and Gold, who's another online supplier, blue is coarse, grey is medium, brown is fine, and green is extra fine. If I look at, say, Australian jewellery suppliers, green is coarse, black is medium, pink is extra fine. My supplier from Wales, who sells me these little pin rubbers, doesn't have quite that degree of definition between them, but brown and yellow ones are medium, green and white ones are fine. So different manufacturers use different colours to indicate the degree of abrasiveness of their polishing rubbers, which obviously makes life a little bit difficult if you're trying to understand how abrasive your rubber is. So there are, well, three ways, I suppose, that you can know how abrasive your rubber is. The first is pay attention when you order them or receive them and look at any description provided by the manufacturer about how abrasive it happens to be. The second way is when you use them. You'll see as you use them which ones are cutting away more glass, which ones are leaving a slightly more cloudy surface, which ones are less abrasive, not eating into the glass so much but leaving a shinier surface. And the third way is to look very, very closely at the surface of the rubber polisher. This is easier to see when it's been used for a while. When it's new, the actual surface is as it comes from the cutting machine, whereas once you've used it for a while, the degree of abrasiveness becomes more apparent when you look at it. But if you look at it very, very closely, using a magnifying glass or just zooming in with your camera on your phone, you can just about see that the size of the abrasive varies from disc to disc. This blue disc that I have is actually a Proxon disc, and it is the coarsest one that I commonly use. Whereas the black one, which is still a coarse disc, has got a noticeable difference in the size of the pieces of abrasive within it. Whereas if we go right down to the brown one, which is the finest one, once it's been used for a while, you can actually see that it's a little bit less abrasive. So those are the ways that you can tell how abrasive your polishing rubbers are, how fine they are. The easiest way, clearly, is to get information from the manufacturer for it. But for the likes of these green bullet-shaped polishing rubbers, they quite often don't say. So why do we need different degrees of abrasion? It's very like if you do any woodworking and you have to sand something down. When you're sanding down a piece of wood, you might start with an 80 grit sandpaper and sand it a bit with that one, and then move on to a 120 grit to sand it again, and that takes out some of the marks left by the 80 grit. And then you might move to a 240 grit which takes out the marks left by the 120 and leaves you with a smoother surface. It's very, very similar when you're using polishing rubbers. If I have started with a very rough engraved piece of glass, engraved perhaps with a diamond bar, and I want to take that back to a very, very shiny surface, I'm going to start by using a coarse polishing rubber, which will start to take out the scratches and then work my way down through the grits to get to the finest one I have, which is the brown one in this case, or the grey one in the pencil rubbers, which will give me the smoothest, shiniest and darkest tone. So if you think about it, a bit like using sandpaper, you're going to start with a coarse one and work your way down through the polishing rubbers till you get to the tone that you're trying to get to. Now obviously, once you've had a bit more practice and a bit more experience, you might not need to stop and use every colour. You might know which one you can use straight away. But that's the basic principle of it. So that is the story about polishing rubbers. That's what the colours mean. I wish I could tell you there was a standardised set of colours which always mean the same thing, irrespective of which manufacturer you go to. Sadly, that's just not the case. It would make life easier. But if you pay attention to what the manufacturer tells you about them, if you pay attention to the impact it has on the glass as you're using it, and if you look very, very, very closely at the structure of the polishing rubber, you can tell which ones are coarse, which ones are fine, and hopefully that will help you get to the degree of polish that you're looking for in your finished engraving. Anyway, I think that's all I can tell you about polishing rubbers. I hope that you've found this useful. If you haven't already seen the video I did on shading, if you have a look at that, it will clarify how these polishing rubbers are used and the impact of them. And as I say, I hope you found it useful and that you'll come back and watch my next video when I get that made. Thank you.